In the vast expanse of the cosmos, where stars shimmer like scattered diamonds against an endless velvet canvas, there existed a realm known only to those who dared to dream beyond their own worlds. It was here, on a planet cloaked in swirling mists and bathed in hues of violet and emerald, that the alien queen resided, a being of unparalleled beauty and power whose very presence commanded reverence from all who crossed her path. Her name, whispered in awe across galaxies, carried with it both fear and fascination. She ruled not just through might but through an aura of mystery so profound that even her closest advisors hesitated to meet her gaze for too long. The queen's dominion stretched far beyond the boundaries of her opulent palace, which floated atop crystalline spires jutting out from the planet's surface like jagged teeth reaching for the heavens. Within these walls, she governed with wisdom born of centuries, her decisions shaping destinies light years away. Yet, despite her immense authority, there remained one secret she guarded fiercely, the belief that no mortal eyes could pierce the veil of invisibility she wove around herself when alone. This conviction had grown over time, nurtured by ancient texts and rituals passed down through generations of her lineage. To her, this invisibility was more than mere protection. It was a sacred privilege, a testament to her divine right to rule. Her chambers were as magnificent as they were enigmatic, filled with artifacts collected from conquered civilizations and treasures forged by artisans whose skills had been lost to time. The air within shimmered faintly, imbued with energies that danced along unseen currents. Here, amidst the grandeur, she would retreat after days spent presiding over councils and strategizing wars. It was in these moments of solitude that she shed the weight of her crown, figuratively and literally, allowing herself to exist without pretense or armor. Unbeknownst to her, however, this sanctuary was not as impenetrable as she believed. For while the queen basked in the illusion of seclusion, oblivious to any prying eyes, fate had begun weaving its own intricate tapestry. Across the void of space, humanity had been advancing at a pace that defied expectation. Their technology, once primitive compared to the wonders of other species, now rivaled even the most sophisticated alien innovations. Among them stood warriors bred not only for combat but also for exploration, individuals trained to adapt, survive, and conquer wherever they ventured. These humans possessed tools capable of unraveling mysteries thought impossible to solve, including the supposed invisibility cloaking the alien queen. And so it came to pass that one such warrior found themselves drawn inexorably toward the queen's domain. Guided by instincts honed through countless battles and driven by curiosity sparked by fragmented reports of her existence, this human infiltrated the labyrinthine corridors of her fortress undetected. Each step brought them closer to truths hidden behind veils of myth and legend. They moved silently, guided by shadows and whispers, until finally, they reached the threshold of her private quarters. What awaited them inside would challenge everything they knew about courage, vulnerability, and the fragile threads binding predator and prey together. The chamber door slid open soundlessly, revealing a scene that seemed almost surreal in its intimacy. The alien queen stood before a gilded mirror, her lithe form partially obscured by folds of iridescent fabric cascading from her shoulders. Her movements were fluid yet deliberate, each gesture imbued with an elegance that spoke of centuries spent mastering grace under pressure. Around her neck hung a delicate chain adorned with gemstones that pulsed faintly, casting shifting patterns of light across the room. These stones, though small, radiated an energy that made the air hum softly, as if alive with anticipation. She paused, tilting her head slightly as though listening to some distant melody only she could hear. Then, with a slow, measured motion, she began unfastening the clasp of her ornate garment. The material slipped away, pooling at her feet like liquid starlight, leaving her clad in nothing but the ethereal glow emanating from her skin. Her body was a masterpiece of evolution, every curve and contour designed not merely for function but for sheer aesthetic splendor. Her limbs tapered gracefully, ending in digits tipped with claws that gleamed like polished obsidian. Her spine bore subtle ridges that caught the light, giving her an almost reptilian allure, yet her face retained an otherworldly softness that contradicted the sharp angles elsewhere. Unaware of the intruder lurking just beyond the threshold, the queen continued her ritualistic transformation. She raised her arms above her head, stretching languidly, and let out a sigh that resonated deeply within the chamber. The sound carried a strange duality, both haunting and comforting, like the first breath of dawn breaking over an alien horizon. Her tail, long and sinuous, coiled lazily behind her, its tip flicking occasionally as if swatting away invisible irritants. Every movement seemed calculated to release tension, to strip away layers of responsibility until she stood bare, not just physically, but emotionally. Her confidence in her invisibility lent her actions an uninhibited quality rarely seen among beings of such stature. There was no self-consciousness in the way she turned to examine her reflection, running clawed fingers lightly over her scales, which shimmered with colors that shifted depending on the angle of observation. Her eyes, large and multifaceted, glowed faintly, reflecting not just the ambient light but perhaps fragments of memories or dreams. For a moment, she closed them, leaning forward ever so slightly, as if communing with her own image. The vulnerability etched into her features during this fleeting pause was staggering, a stark contrast to the commanding figure she presented to her subjects. Yet, unbeknownst to her, the warrior standing frozen in the doorway witnessed every detail. The human's breath hitched involuntarily, caught between awe and disbelief. Never had they imagined encountering such raw authenticity in someone so powerful. The queen's belief in her invisibility rendered her utterly defenseless, exposing facets of her personality that likely hadn't seen daylight, or rather, starlight, in decades. And though the warrior's training screamed caution, urging retreat before discovery, something deeper rooted them to the spot. Perhaps it was the realization that this moment transcended mere espionage. It was a glimpse into the soul of a ruler whose legend loomed larger than life itself. Time seemed to stretch infinitely as the human warrior remained rooted to the spot, unable to tear their gaze away from the alien queen's unguarded display. The initial shock of witnessing her vulnerability gave way to a torrent of conflicting emotions, each vying for dominance within the confines of their mind. Awe mingled uneasily with guilt, admiration clashed with apprehension, and somewhere beneath it all lay a spark of empathy that threatened to ignite into something far more dangerous. This wasn't supposed to happen, not according to mission parameters or personal ethics. They had been trained to infiltrate, observe, and report back with cold efficiency. Yet here they stood, transfixed by the sight of a being who wielded power over entire galaxies yet chose to reveal herself in such an intimate manner. Their heart pounded erratically, the rhythm betraying the internal struggle unfolding within. Every instinct screamed at them to withdraw, to slip back into the shadows before the queen realized she was not alone. But another part, the part that had always yearned to understand rather than conquer, held them fast. What did it mean to see someone like her stripped of pretense? Was this vulnerability genuine, or merely another layer of complexity woven into the enigma she embodied? The questions swirled relentlessly, each answer leading to new uncertainties. As the warrior grappled with these thoughts, their physical presence betrayed them. A faint creak echoed through the chamber, barely audible but enough to ripple the stillness enveloping the room. The queen froze mid-motion, her glowing eyes snapping open wide as her body tensed like a coiled spring. For a heartbeat, silence reigned supreme, heavy and suffocating. Then, slowly, deliberately, she turned toward the source of the disturbance, her expression morphing from serene introspection to predatory alertness in an instant. The transformation was startling, almost violent in its abruptness. Gone was the contemplative ruler. In her place stood a creature poised to strike, every muscle taut with readiness. The warrior's breath caught again, this time laced with dread. They had been discovered, or worse, anticipated. The queen's gaze locked onto theirs, piercing through the dim light with an intensity that felt like a physical force. Though her lips remained sealed, the question burned palpably in the air. Who dares intrude upon my sanctum? The warrior's mind raced, searching desperately for words or actions that might diffuse the situation. But before they could act, the queen took a single step forward, her tail swaying ominously behind her. The movement was deceptively casual, yet it carried an unmistakable threat, a silent declaration that whatever followed would be entirely on her terms. And so, the tableau held, two figures suspended in a fragile balance of power and perception, neither fully comprehending what had transpired nor what might come next. The warrior's pulse thundered in their ears, drowning out all else except the undeniable truth staring them in the face. They were no longer invisible either. The room crackled with tension, the kind that precedes storms or battles, where every second stretches into eternity. The alien queen's multifaceted eyes narrowed slightly, their luminescence intensifying as if fueled by indignation and disbelief. She tilted her head, studying the intruder with a mixture of curiosity and disdain, her tail flicking sharply behind her like the lash of a whip. For a moment, she said nothing, allowing the weight of her presence to fill the space between them. Then, her voice emerged, low, melodic, and edged with venom. You dare, she hissed, each word punctuated by a slight shift in her stance, as though preparing to pounce. You dare invade my sanctum, to witness what no mortal should see? The warrior swallowed hard, their throat dry despite the cool air of the chamber. They had faced countless adversaries before, but none like this. None whose very essence seemed to warp reality itself. Summoning every ounce of resolve, they straightened their posture, meeting her gaze with as much composure as they could muster. I did not intend disrespect, they managed, their voice steady but tinged with urgency. I came seeking answers, not intrusion. Answers, the queen repeated, her tone dripping with mockery. She took another step forward, closing the distance between them until they were mere feet apart. Her proximity was overwhelming, her sheer presence pressing down like an invisible hand threatening to crush resistance. What answers could possibly justify your trespass, human? She demanded, her claws flexing subtly at her sides. Do you think yourself clever, sneaking into my domain? Or are you simply foolish enough to believe you can defy the laws of my world without consequence? Her words struck like daggers, each syllable laden with contempt. Yet beneath the anger simmering in her voice, there was something else, a flicker of vulnerability masked by rage. The warrior caught it, fleeting though it was, and seized upon it as a lifeline. Your Majesty, they began, choosing their words carefully, I have traveled great distances, risked much, to understand the truths hidden behind legends. I sought knowledge, not conquest. If I have offended, it was unintentional. The queen's lip curled upward in a snarl, baring razor-sharp teeth that gleamed menacingly in the dim light. Knowledge, she spat, the word rolling off her tongue like a curse. You speak of knowledge as though it is some noble pursuit, yet your kind has built empires on lies and bloodshed. Tell me, human, how many worlds have you understood only to conquer? How many lives have you extinguished in the name of progress? The accusation stung, cutting deeper than any blade could. The warrior flinched visibly, their defenses wavering under the weight of her words. It was true, they belonged to a species infamous for its ambition, its relentless drive to expand and dominate. But they were different, weren't they? Or at least, they wanted to believe they were. Not all humans are the same, they countered, their voice rising slightly in defiance. Some of us seek understanding, not destruction. Some of us wish to bridge divides, not widen them. The queen let out a low, guttural laugh, the sound reverberating through the chamber like distant thunder. Ah, how quaint, she sneered, circling the warrior now, her movements fluid and hypnotic. A lone idealist among a sea of predators. Do you truly expect me to believe such naivety? That you wandered here, unbidden, purely out of curiosity? No, the warrior admitted, their voice dropping to a near whisper. I came because I needed to know if the stories were true, if you were real. If the power you wield is as boundless as they say. They hesitated, then added, and now I see that it is. For a moment, the queen stopped her pacing, her luminous eyes locking onto the warriors once more. There was a flicker of surprise in her expression, quickly masked by skepticism. And what will you do with this knowledge, human? She asked, her tone softer but no less dangerous. Will you run back to your kind and proclaim my existence? Will you rally your armies to march upon my world, believing yourselves invincible? I won't, the warrior replied firmly, though their hands trembled slightly at their sides. I came alone because I wanted to see the truth for myself, not to exploit it. Your secrets are yours to keep. I have no desire to take them. The queen regarded them silently, her expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, she turned away, pacing toward the gilded mirror where she had stood moments earlier. Her reflection stared back at her, distorted slightly by the pulsating glow of the gemstones around her neck. You claim innocence, she murmured, almost to herself, but innocence is a luxury few possess. Even fewer deserve. The warrior watched her warily, unsure whether her retreat signaled a reprieve or merely the calm before a storm. If I've wronged you, I'll accept whatever punishment you deem fit, they said, their voice unwavering despite the uncertainty gnawing at their core. But know this, I meant no harm. The queen's shoulders stiffened momentarily before relaxing again. Without turning to face them, she spoke, her voice softer now, almost contemplative. Harm is often unintended, yet its consequences linger nonetheless. You stand before me, having shattered the illusion I held dear. What am I to do with you now? It was a rhetorical question, yet it hung heavily in the air, unanswered. Neither moved, neither spoke, as the seconds ticked by like drops of water falling into an abyss. The tension remained palpable, a living thing coiled tightly between them, waiting for the slightest provocation to snap. In the charged silence that followed, the alien queen's gaze drifted to the floor, her claws tapping lightly against the smooth surface in a rhythmic cadence. The sound was oddly soothing, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within her. Her mind raced, grappling with the implications of this unprecedented encounter. Centuries of isolation, bolstered by the certainty of her invisibility, had shielded her from scrutiny and judgment. Now, stripped of that illusion, she found herself confronting not only the presence of the intruder but also the unsettling realization that her vulnerabilities were no longer hers alone to bear. The warrior, sensing the shift in her demeanor, remained rooted to the spot, their chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. They dared not interrupt her thoughts, knowing full well that the next word she uttered could seal their fate. Yet, even in this precarious moment, they couldn't help but marvel at the complexity of the being before them. The queen's anger had been fierce, yes, but it was layered with something deeper. An ache, perhaps, born of loneliness or betrayal. It was a side of her that legends never mentioned, a facet of her character that defied the archetype of the untouchable sovereign. Finally, the queen turned back to face them, her expression inscrutable. "You claim to seek understanding," she said, her voice measured, almost clinical. "Yet understanding requires trust, does it not? Trust that neither party will exploit the other's weaknesses." She paused, tilting her head slightly as though weighing her own words. "Tell me, human, why should I believe you capable of such restraint? Your kind has proven time and again that curiosity often leads to conquest." The warrior hesitated, their mind racing to formulate a response that might sway her. "Because I've seen what conquest brings," they replied earnestly, their voice carrying a note of quiet conviction. "I've walked among ruins left behind by wars fought in the name of knowledge. I've listened to the cries of those who lost everything because someone decided they had the right to take it. I don't want to add to that legacy." The queen's eyes narrowed slightly, though whether in skepticism or intrigue was impossible to discern. "Noble sentiments," she murmured, taking a slow step closer. "But words are cheap, especially when spoken under duress. Actions define intent, human. What action will you take now, knowing what you've seen?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. The warrior swallowed hard, their mind churning with possibilities. They understood the gravity of the situation. This was no mere test of wit or courage. It was a reckoning, a moment where choices would ripple outward, shaping futures yet unseen. "If you allow me to leave," they began cautiously, "I swear on whatever honor I have left that I will speak of this to no one. Not out of fear, but out of respect for you, and for the sanctity of what I've witnessed." The queen's lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. "Respect," she echoed, the word tasting foreign on her tongue. "An admirable notion, though rare among your species." She studied him intently, her multifaceted eyes seeming to peer directly into his soul. "But tell me, human, how can I trust that your respect will endure once you return to your kind? How can I be certain you won't succumb to the pressures of your peers, the allure of glory, or the seductive promise of power?" The warrior met her gaze unflinchingly, though their heart hammered wildly in their chest. "You can't," they admitted, their honesty raw and unfiltered. "All I can offer is my word, and the hope that you'll recognize sincerity when you see it." For a long moment, the queen said nothing, her expression unreadable. Then, with a fluid motion, she swept her discarded garment from the floor, draping it loosely around her shoulders. The fabric shimmered faintly, catching the light in ways that made it seem alive. "Sincerity," she mused, her tone thoughtful. "A fragile thing, easily broken. Yet perhaps," she trailed off, her gaze drifting past the warrior to the chamber door, as if considering options beyond the immediate confrontation. The warrior held their ground, unwilling to break the tentative thread of connection that had formed between them. They knew they were walking a razor's edge, one misstep away from disaster. But they also sensed that this moment, fraught with danger though it was, carried within it the seeds of something extraordinary. Whether it would blossom into understanding or wither into conflict remained to be seen. As the seconds stretched into minutes, the atmosphere in the chamber shifted subtly. The tension, while still present, softened at the edges, becoming less adversarial and more contemplative. The Queen's movements grew slower, more deliberate, as if she were sifting through layers of thought, weighing possibilities that extended far beyond the immediate stakes. She moved toward the gilded mirror once more, her reflection rippling faintly in the pulsating glow of her gemstone necklace. Her claws traced the edge of the frame, leaving faint trails of luminescence in their wake. "You speak of respect," she said finally, her voice carrying a tone of quiet deliberation. "But respect must be earned, not given freely. What would you do to prove yours?" The question caught the warrior off guard, forcing them to recalibrate their focus. They had expected demands for retribution or outright dismissal, not an invitation, however veiled, to demonstrate their intentions. "Anything," they replied without hesitation, their voice firm despite the uncertainty swirling within. "Name your terms, and I will meet them." The Queen turned to face them, her expression inscrutable. "Anything," she repeated, her tone laced with skepticism. Such bold declarations are easy to make when death looms as the alternative. But what if I asked for something less final, yet equally demanding? Would you still agree so readily? The warrior's brow furrowed slightly, their mind racing to anticipate her request. "If it proves my sincerity, then yes," they said, their resolve unwavering. "I came here seeking truth, not absolution. Whatever you ask, I'll honor it." A flicker of amusement passed over the Queen's features, though it was tinged with something darker. Perhaps suspicion, perhaps calculation. "Very well," she murmured, stepping closer until they were separated by mere inches. Her presence was overwhelming, her scent, a blend of metallic tang and something floral yet alien, filling the air between them. "I will grant you a chance to earn my trust. But know this, failure will not be tolerated." The warrior nodded, their pulse quickening. "Understood." The Queen regarded them for a moment longer, her multifaceted eyes glinting with an unreadable emotion. Then, with a swift motion, she extended one clawed hand, pointing toward the chamber door. "Follow me," she commanded, her voice brooking no argument. Without waiting for a response, she strode past them, her tail swaying behind her like a banner of authority. The warrior hesitated only briefly before falling into step behind her, their senses heightened as they navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the palace. The architecture shifted subtly as they moved, the crystalline spires giving way to walls adorned with intricate carvings that seemed to writhe and twist in the dim light. Strange symbols glowed faintly along the ceiling, casting eerie shadows that danced across the floor. The air grew cooler, carrying with it a faint hum that resonated deep within their bones. It was as though the very structure of the palace responded to the Queen's presence, bending to her will like a living entity. They descended a spiraling staircase that led to a lower level of the fortress, where the opulence of the upper chambers gave way to utilitarian design. Here, the halls were lined with doors crafted from dark, unpolished metal, each marked with glyphs that pulsed faintly with energy. The Queen paused before one such door, her claws tracing the symbols etched into its surface. With a soft hiss, the portal slid open, revealing a chamber unlike any they had seen thus far. Inside, the space was dominated by a massive circular platform suspended above a pool of liquid that shimmered with an iridescent sheen. The substance appeared to defy gravity, swirling lazily in patterns that seemed almost sentient. Surrounding the platform were several consoles embedded with glowing crystals, their surfaces alive with streams of data that flowed like rivers of light. The air was thick with static electricity, raising the hairs on the back of the warrior's neck as they stepped inside. "This is the Nexus chamber," the Queen explained, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "It serves as the heart of my domain, a conduit for the energies that sustain my rule. Few are permitted to enter, and fewer still leave unchanged." She turned to face the warrior, her expression stern. "Here, you will undergo a trial, one designed to test not only your resolve but also your capacity for growth. Should you succeed, you may yet prove worthy of my trust. Fail, and you will face consequences far greater than mere exile." The warrior swallowed hard, their throat dry despite the cool air. "What must I do?" they asked, their voice steady despite the knot of apprehension tightening in their stomach. The queen gestured toward the platform, her claws glinting ominously in the dim light. "Step onto the dais," she instructed. "The trial will begin the moment you do." Without further hesitation, the warrior complied, ascending the steps to stand at the center of the platform. As soon as their boots touched the surface, the chamber erupted into activity. The consoles flared brightly, their crystals emitting beams of light that converged above the warrior's head, forming a dome of radiant energy. The liquid below began to churn violently, sending waves crashing against the edges of the pool. A low hum filled the air, growing louder until it vibrated through every fiber of their being. The queen watched impassively from the sidelines, her arms crossed over her chest. "The nexus will probe your mind," she explained, her voice cutting through the din. "It will expose your fears, your doubts, and your deepest desires. Only by confronting them can you hope to emerge victorious. Resist, and you will be consumed." Before the warrior could respond, the dome of light descended, enveloping them completely. The world around them dissolved into a kaleidoscope of images and sensations, each more disorienting than the last. They saw glimpses of battles fought and lost, faces of loved ones long gone, and visions of futures yet unwritten. Pain and pleasure intertwined, blurring the line between reality and illusion. Through it all, the queen's voice echoed faintly, a distant anchor in the chaos. "Prove yourself," she whispered, her words reverberating like a mantra. "Prove yourself." And so, the trial began, a crucible of fire and shadow, where the warrior's very essence would be tested, shaped, and ultimately transformed. Whether they would emerge stronger or shattered remained to be seen, but one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The trial within the Nexus chamber was unlike anything the warrior had ever experienced. It was not merely a test of physical endurance or mental acuity, but an assault on their very soul, stripping away layers of identity until only raw truth remained. The kaleidoscope of images and sensations intensified, each vision more vivid and visceral than the last. They relived moments of triumph and failure, joy and sorrow, love and loss, all magnified to unbearable clarity. Faces of comrades who had fallen in battle stared back at them, their eyes accusing yet filled with unspoken forgiveness. Voices whispered from the void, some familiar, others alien, weaving a cacophony of judgment and encouragement. At the heart of it all stood the alien queen, her presence omnipresent even as she remained physically distant. Her voice guided, or taunted, the warrior through the maelstrom, urging them to confront what they feared most, not death, but insignificance. "You seek to prove yourself worthy," she intoned, her words resonating like thunder. "But worthiness is not measured by deeds alone. It is forged in the crucible of self-awareness. Face your shadow, human, or be consumed by it." The warrior clenched their fists, fighting against the overwhelming tide of emotion threatening to drown them. Each memory, each fear, felt like a weight pressing down upon their chest, suffocating and relentless. Yet amidst the chaos, a flicker of resolve began to burn, a tiny flame that refused to be extinguished. They realized then that this trial was not about proving themselves to the queen. It was about proving something far more fundamental, that they were capable of growth, of change, of transcending the limitations imposed by their own nature. With newfound determination, the warrior turned inward, confronting the specters of doubt and regret that haunted them. They saw themselves as they truly were, flawed, imperfect, and deeply human, but also resilient, compassionate, and driven by a desire to understand rather than dominate. Slowly, painstakingly, they began to unravel the tangled threads of their psyche, untangling guilt from responsibility, fear from courage. The process was agonizing, akin to peeling back layers of scar tissue, but with each step forward, the oppressive weight lifted slightly, replaced by a sense of clarity and purpose. As the warrior delved deeper into their own mind, the Nexus responded, its energy shifting in response to their transformation. The swirling liquid below calmed, its iridescent surface reflecting not just light but fragments of the warrior's journey. The glowing crystals dimmed, their brilliance now focused inward, illuminating the path toward resolution. The voices faded, leaving only silence, and the steady rhythm of the warrior's breathing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the dome of light dissipated, retreating back into the console surrounding the chamber. The warriors staggered slightly, their legs trembling beneath them, but they remained upright, their gaze fixed firmly ahead. When they turned to face the queen, there was no trace of fear or hesitation in their expression, only quiet strength tempered by humility. The alien queen regarded them silently, her multifaceted eyes scanning their form as if searching for any lingering cracks in their resolve. For a long moment, she said nothing, allowing the weight of the trial to settle between them. Then, with a slow nod, she spoke. "You have faced your shadow," she said, her tone softer now, almost contemplative. "And though scars remain, you have emerged intact. Few could endure such scrutiny without breaking." The warrior exhaled sharply, their shoulders sagging slightly with relief. "I didn't do it for you," they admitted, their voice raspy but resolute. "I did it because I needed to know if I was strong enough to carry the burden of what I've seen, not just here, but everywhere I've been. If I'm going to bridge divides, I need to start by bridging the one within myself." The queen tilted her head slightly, a faint smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "An admirable sentiment," she murmured. "But remember this, human, understanding oneself is only the first step. True wisdom lies in using that understanding to shape the world around you. Not for personal gain, but for the greater good." The warrior nodded, absorbing her words. "I'll do my best," they promised. "No matter how difficult the road ahead may be." For the first time since their encounter began, the queen's demeanor softened entirely. She stepped closer, her movements graceful and unhurried, until she stood mere inches away. Reaching out, she placed a clawed hand lightly on the warrior's shoulder, the gesture surprisingly gentle despite her formidable appearance. "Then perhaps there is hope for your kind yet," she said, her voice carrying a note of cautious optimism. "Go now, human. Return to your world and share what you have learned, not through words, but through actions. Let your choices speak louder than any declaration of intent." Without another word, the queen turned and gestured toward the chamber door, which slid open silently. The warrior hesitated briefly, glancing back at her one final time before stepping through the threshold. As they made their way through the labyrinthine corridors of the palace, they couldn't shake the feeling that something profound had shifted, not just within themselves, but between their species and hers. When the warrior finally emerged onto the planet's surface, the violet and emerald skies stretched endlessly above them, vast and indifferent. Their ship awaited nearby, its sleek form gleaming under the alien suns. Before boarding, they paused, looking back at the floating fortress perched atop its crystalline spires. Though the queen was nowhere to be seen, her presence lingered in the air, a silent reminder of the bond they had forged, a fragile thread connecting two vastly different worlds. As the ship ascended into the heavens, the warrior vowed to honor the trust the queen had placed in them. They knew the challenges ahead would be immense, fraught with obstacles both external and internal. But they also knew that understanding was a seed, and seeds required patience, care, and faith to grow. Whether humanity and the alien queen's people could coexist remained uncertain, but for the first time, the possibility seemed less like a dream and more like a destiny waiting to unfold. And so, the warrior departed, carrying with them not just knowledge but hope, a spark of potential that might one day ignite a brighter future for all.